Hello and welcome. My name is Lauren Lockhart. I'm the Executive Director at the La Jolla Historical Society. Thank you so much for joining us for our lecture this evening, Beautifying La Jolla, Browning Scripps, and the Preservation of Coast and Grove, presented by Professor Molly McLean. We are especially grateful to the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego for hosting us this evening and for their partnership. Thanks also to Jenna Jacobs, Anna Zeltins-Kia, and the venue specialist team here at MCASD for making tonight's event possible. It feels especially meaningful to gather here in the former residence of Browning Scripps herself, and just next door, her half-sister Virginia Scripps made her home at our very own museum campus, a reminder of the lasting imprint the Scripps family has had across the region and our two institutions. I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to our board of directors, many of whom are here this evening, and to our La Jolla Historical Society members for their ongoing support. Thanks to all of you here tonight for being part of our shared commitment to celebrating La Jolla's history and cultural legacy. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our speaker, Molly McLean. Molly McLean is a graduate of the University of Chicago and Yale University, and is a professor of history at the University of San Diego. Her academic honors include USD's Distinguished University Professorship and the Davies Award for Faculty Achievement. A ninth-generation San Diegan, she is the author of 4 books and numerous articles, including Browning Scripps, New Money and American Philanthropy of 2017. An editor of the Journal of San Diego History for over a decade, she encouraged writers to explore the region's fascinating and understudied past. McLean has worked on a variety of public history projects, including the listing of the La Jolla Park Coastal Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places, which is a very significant achievement. And we are so fortunate at the Historical Society to have benefited from Molly's expertise through her service on our board of directors for many years, and we're so grateful that she was willing to present this lecture for you this evening. Thank you so much, Molly.
Oh, thank you so much for the invitation to speak. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, super. If for any reason you can't, just kind of wave your hand in the back. So, you know, I look around the room tonight and I see friends and new friends, and I see a lot of people who are carrying forward Ellen Scripps's remarkable vision for San Diego. She understood that La Jolla's coastline was not just a beautiful landscape, though golly, it's a beautiful landscape, but it's actually an irreplaceable heritage that requires active protection. And the La Jolla Historical Society, guided by Lauren Lockhart, and which stands in solidarity with a lot of other community organizations, really, it's proof that her faith in community outreach and stewardship was well placed. Oops. So the story that I'm going to tell tonight is about how Scripps transformed the idea of what it meant to improve a community. So when most civic leaders of her era talked about improvement or beautification, what they meant was adding ornamental gardens, grand buildings, formal parks. But Scripps looked at San Diego and saw something different. She saw a place where natural beauty could become the highest form of civic art. In other words, preservation could be more transformative than any construction project. And so tonight we'll look at how her philosophy shaped both La Jolla and San Diego's coastal communities. So Ellen Scripps was a Victorian. She's born in London in 1836, a year before Queen Victoria ascends the throne. In the 1840s, she and her family moved from London to the Illinois Prairie. She lived through the Civil War and Reconstruction, the settlement of the American West, the Gilded Age, and the Roaring Twenties. And she dies at the beginning of the Great Depression. So Ellen and her brothers are really newly rich, middle-class entrepreneurs who made their fortunes by investing in communications infrastructure during America's second industrial revolution. And they started with one newspaper, the Detroit Evening News, and developed a publishing empire that linked big cities and small towns from the East Coast to the West. So Scripps was the only member of her family to attend college. She graduated from Knox College on the eve of the Civil War. She never married, she never had children, but instead she spent her young life working as a journalist and an editor. And like many single Victorian women, she lived with her brothers and their families until she was nearly 60 years old. She traded childcare for rent and carefully invested her income in newspapers. And by the 1880s, she was rich enough to take a break from the family business and, with her brothers, travel the world. So over the course of 2 decades, Ellen traveled through the US, Mexico, Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. By the end of the 19th century, railroads and steamships had really revolutionized travel, making what had been really time-consuming and very costly journeys suddenly safe and reasonably quick. Railroads had also transformed regional development patterns. They brought people not to established towns, but to remote places of natural beauty. So one of those places was Devon, which was once a very isolated county on England's southwest coast. Now it was accessible by railway. Anybody been to Devon? Yeah. Wasn't it pretty? So in 1889, Ellen spent a month there looking for her family roots and exploring the landscapes that had been made popular by the romantic novel Lorna Doone. Lorna Doone. I always thought it was just a cookie. And so she saw what railway-enabled scenic tourism had done to the region. And she wrote to her brothers about the Exmoor coast. And she wrote, "People have found out this Devonshire spot of beauty, and prices have gone up accordingly. Every place is full, and excursions are constantly coming down from London, Bristol, Exeter." She added, "There are Lorna Doone coaches, Lorna Doone hotels, and the name in the book stare one in the face everywhere." So keep in mind, San Diego will have its own literary romance in the form of Helen Hunt Jackson's Ramona. So the British pioneered scenic tourism, which is really the world's first systematic approach to marketing and accessing natural beauty through travel. For example, the Scottish Highlands, the Lake District, the English Riviera, were all advertised as places of sublime natural beauty, all accessible from London. Been there? Yeah. So here, the tourist infrastructure, there's hotels and overlooks and walking paths, presented natural beauty instead of trying to compete with it. So by the 1880s, scenic tourism as an economic model had spread across Europe and the US. And it was particularly pronounced in the American West, where the Southern Pacific and the Santa Fe railroads promoted Yellowstone, Yosemite, Colorado Springs, the Monterey Peninsula, and Southern California as sort of scenic wonderlands. So it's worth pointing out that the 19th century travelers viewed the landscape through the lens of European aesthetics. So the 18th century had developed and perceived a way of representing the landscape that was called the picturesque, which literally means it can fit into a picture. And so the picturesque was supposed to bridge these very rational expressions of beauty, symmetry and harmony and proportion, together with the expression of the sublime, right? This physical, instinctual thrill that gets evoked by the mystery and the grandeur of the natural world. And so this aesthetic framework encouraged people to see landscapes as artistic compositions rather than inhabited places. And so we look at photographs from this period, and they really reflect this picturesque sensibility. They present much of the American West as empty. It's a depopulated landscape, waiting to either be consumed or possessed. So in the 1890s, Ellen and her brother E.W. followed the railway scenic route to San Diego. And a few years earlier, the Pacific Coast Land Bureau, which is an agent for the Central and Southern Pacific Railroads, had subdivided Poway, El Cajon, National City, and La Jolla. Package deal. And this image here shows the El Cajon Valley. It's so beautiful. The International Company of Mexico, meanwhile, began to develop Ensenada with the expectations that there would be railway lines throughout Baja California. And the entire region was sold as a health paradise, the land of the perfect climate. The therapeutic quality of the air was touted as a cure for tuberculosis, and mineral springs offered relief from rheumatism and liver and kidney complaints. The Hotel Del, advertised here, began as a health resort. And the table on this advertisement shows 2 decades of annual temperatures. And it really is sort of 78 degrees all year round. So impressed by the weather and by the scenic beauty of the area, Ellen moved to La Jolla in 1891 with her 2 brothers, Fred and E.W. Scripps. And they established a family compound at Miramar, which is now in Scripps Ranch. Began building reservoirs, citrus groves. And Ellen lived here for a time before deciding to make a home for herself in La Jolla, which at that time was just a little summer colony of bungalows kind of perched on the cliffs overlooking the sea. So in 1897, Ellen built a house for herself and her 2 unmarried sisters, Annie and Virginia, and she named it South Milton Villa after the street in London where she had been born. So we are really right now at the location of that original house. And it's here where she's going to begin 3 decades of remarkable philanthropy. So La Jolla was an early suburb that was shaped by railway development. It was in the 1880s, it was targeted by investors ready to capitalize on access to kind of unspoiled nature. So the whole area was known for its sea caves, its rocky outcroppings, sea stacks like Alligator Head and Cathedral Rock. It was also home to rare Torrey Pines trees. And in 1887, speculators from New York contracted with the Pacific Coast Land Bureau to survey, subdivide, and sell this 400-acre La Jolla Park. Some key features were a coastal road and a park just above the cove. And you know how much the lots cost? $5 to $10 each. So after a delay caused by kind of a boom and bust cycles of the real estate market, the San Diego Pacific Beach and La Jolla Railway arrived in 1894. And it was this railroad that sponsored many of the early kind of improvement projects along the coast. It built a bathhouse, which you can see right there, and a tent city. It also built a pavilion where they hosted concerts and dances, and it promoted events like exhibition diving, a glass-bottomed boat that took tourists to see submarine gardens. And on holiday weekends, more than 1,000 people flowed into La Jolla and out again. So in the early photographs, we see a lot of the charm and none of the trash. So tourism then then as now threatened to destroy the sense of wilderness that people came to see. Along the coast and in the pines, people left garbage, tin cans, broken bottles, orange peels, newspapers. They lit fires and allowed the ashes to smolder. On the Torrey Pines mesa, residents and visitors gathered up branches, pine cones, sometimes even trees, as Christmas decorations. So in 1899, Ellen Scripps took her neighbors to task for failing to consider the need for both scenic tourism and conservation. And she called this the future of La Jolla in a talk that she gave to the Women's Club. So tourism brings a lot of benefits. A stable, permanent workforce in what at that time was a really remote area. It justified infrastructure projects like roads and water systems and telephone and electricity. And natural beauty also attracted well-to-do residents who had the capital to support cultural institutions. But conservation was the strategy that was holding this economic model together. So one result of Scripps's scolding lecture was the revitalization of the La Jolla Improvement Society in 1902. And groups like this had begun to appear really all over the country at about this time, right around 1900. They were inspired by Charles Robinson's book called The Improvement of Cities and Towns. And it encouraged local groups not to rely on experts, but to actually make small incremental changes themselves. So La Jolla's Improvement Society, which was composed of property owners, they elected officers, they drew up bylaws, they formed committees, they collected dues, and they held meetings. Scripps ultimately funded many of their projects, but she felt strongly that philanthropy should be a grassroots effort and not a shower of gold from above. So one of the group's first tasks was actually to secure public access to the coast. And that means they had to overcome a legal challenge by the owners of the former La Jolla Park Hotel, who claimed that the park, our park, should be considered private property and sold. So they beat them back. And in 1903, La Jolla Park came under the jurisdiction of the San Diego Parks Commission, and it joined Torrey Pines, which had been established as a city park in 1899. And shortly after this, La Jolla's tent city was shut down, and the area was returned to its natural state. So shortly after, the next thing that comes is conservation efforts, next on the agenda. The group put rubbish bins in the park, and they organized volunteers to keep them clean. Among them, Virginia Scripps, Ellen's sister, who maneuvered through the area with her wheelbarrow and shovel. And her nephew recalled every morning she walked through town picking up papers. And if she saw anybody drop a paper in the street, she ran after them, shouting, waving her pocketbook or a stick. And she said she really jumped men for spitting tobacco juice. The little girl, Jean Bartlett, age 10, helped. She said, I would pick up orange peels and papers right with her. I really admired her in an odd sort of way. She was so darn zany, but she did get things done. She was a woman of action, and I liked that. So managing tourist routes was just as important as keeping things clean, right? Because otherwise you have people scrambling down hillsides on their way to the water, or trampling along cliffs and disturbing wildlife or fragile plants. And to that end, the Improvement Society developed stairways that led from the railway depot to the coast, and then they created paths along the ocean's edge. So Coast Walk, for example, which was an old trail above the caves, was restored, and a footbridge was built over a double slide. Another project was the creation of these iconic viewpoints up and down the coast. And this is a series of little belvederes that were positioned to maximize views and to provide, shelter from the sun or the rain. And they appear in lots and lots of pictures of the area. And of course, Scripps financed their construction. In 1906, Scripps and her neighbors turned their attention to the park. They built a new and improved bathhouse above the cove with a pool, changing rooms, bathrooms, and this was heavily advertised in ads that were supported by the Improvement Society. Ads, for example, that ran in Out West magazine that claimed La Jolla was a beautiful, healthful, restful winter resort by the sea. So they're positioning La Jolla as this place where nature has very unique healing powers. So among the other kind of improving pursuits in La Jolla was marine biology. And Scripps was really well aware of the Victorian craze for shell collecting and marine life because she had spent a lot of time in Devon, in England, where it said that marine biology as a leisure activity was born. And so in 1905, she and her brother E.W. persuaded the Marine Biological Association to relocate from Coronado to La Jolla. And this would be the beginning of the Scripps Institution of Oceanography. She funded the construction of a small laboratory and museum. And there's the bathhouse. And she encouraged the scientists to give public talks. So for example, one event was advertised as Celebration at the Biological Station, special attractions, including starfish stunts, a fish-eating contest, and the latest summer styles in plankton nets. So it soon became clear that the Marine Biological Laboratory needed a more secluded place to work. And to that end, Scripps financed the purchase of 170 acres of land located at La Jolla Shores. And so this ultimately would provide the room for SIO's future expansion and some isolation from what was going to be the inevitable economic growth of La Jolla. And so that the scientists were not completely isolated, Ellen Scripps offered to build a road from La Jolla through the campus up to the Torrey Pines Mesa. And this became known as the biological grade, or now La Jolla Shores Drive. So it was at this time that Scripps began to be concerned about the future of a grove of exceedingly rare Torrey pines. The trees occupy this really narrow band of suitable habitat that was increasingly threatened by development as La Jolla grew. The accessibility of the site, it was close enough to be easily reached, but isolated enough to feel wild, made it valuable both as a scenic resource, and it made it really vulnerable to destruction. So several parcels of land on the Torrey Pines Mesa had not been included in the city park. So those green parcels were not included. And in 1908, they were put up for sale. So somebody was going to have to buy and preserve those lots for the city, or they were inevitably going to be sold and developed. So Ellen agreed to do it. And for the first lot, 1338, she agreed to pay over $15,000. So if you think about that, and then you remember lots of La Jolla were costing, yeah, it's a lot of money. And her brother said, oh my gosh, she said, this is a holdup. This is exorbitant. And in fact, just a few years later, she bought the next lot for just $4,000. That's how these things go. And she was encouraged by George Marston, one of our great founders of Balboa Park, who wanted to preserve this really incredible landscape from being carved up into small building sites and having trees cut from the ground. So Scripps conceived of Torrey Pines not as an isolated conservation project, but as an integral part of this broader campaign to enhance the scenic beauty and the tourist potential of La Jolla. So she recognized that scenic tourism was shifting from railroad to automobile travel, and that meant that visitors would increasingly be arriving from the north by automobile rather than from the south by train. And she imagined Torrey Pines essentially as a scenic gateway that would allow arriving motorists to have just a dramatic first impression of this exceptional landscape that they were entering. Now, we got Wait a Road through Torrey Pines. She's a Victorian. She's a Victorian. She cannot have anticipated the era of mass automobile tourism, right? In her view, automobiles would be driven by the same well-to-do people that she hoped to attract to La Jolla. So Ellen's vision was supported by her brother E.W. Scripps, who understood the crucial role that road infrastructure would play in the new tourist economy. So in 1905, he had a Rambler Roadster that whizzed over dusty ranch roads, and the following year he bought a Packard touring car that he took on a 21-day trip around California. He was thrilled by his motoring adventure, and so he started to build roads at his estate, Miramar. He was a founding member of San Diego's Highway Commission, and that made it possible for him to construct a road from his house at Miramar to La Jolla, which is now known as Miramar Road. In 1907, he was working with the South Coast Land Company to build a road that would connect his beach house in Del Mar to La Jolla. And you can see the map here. He's a crazy road builder. He builds a little road to Poway. He builds a road to Santee where he has a ranch. He helps finance roads into Mission Valley, the Murray Canyon and Murphy Canyon roads. He's road building. So the Torrey Pines Concrete Highway was open to traffic in, oh wait, actually I'm going to come back here. It's worth noting that relatively few people, right, had cars, given the expense of buying and maintaining them. I'm just going to give you some numbers here. A well-made car could cost up to $6,000 or maybe $200,000 in modern dollars. Ooh, yeah. But it was expected to change. So across the country, urban planners were considering the construction of parkways, again, intended for scenic recreational driving, not trucks, cars. And some really early examples were the Long Island Motor Parkway, now the Vanderbilt Parkway, 1906, and the Bronx River Parkway, 1907. So in 1912, E.W. Scripps proposed that the road through Torrey Pines be paved and designated as one of two major north-south roads linking Los Angeles to San Diego, the other one being the El Camino Real. And the plan faced a lot of opposition because there was the old stagecoach route that ran through Sorrento Valley and Rose Canyon, but eventually prevailed. And the road linked Del Mar then with La Jolla. Then auto traffic came down La Jolla Shores Road, it turned into the village, and then it turned south on La Jolla Boulevard, heading towards Pacific Beach. So that's how you would get to the rest of San Diego. You'd come from LA and come through La Jolla. So the Torrey Pines Concrete Highway opened to traffic in 1915, the year of San Diego's Panama Canal Exposition. And thousands of visitors to Balboa Park headed to their destination along this scenic Torrey Pines route. There's a postcard up here. This scenic route appears in postcards and souvenir guides. And in 1916, Ellen took a drive through the Pines, and she wrote that the views from the bluffs offered the most beautiful panoramas of color of sky and sea ever held in La Jolla. So shortly afterwards, Guy Fleming, a 32-year-old naturalist, wrote to Scripps on behalf of the Floral Association and asked if she would be interested in developing one of the most picturesque and unique parks in the West, and she agreed. So in 1921, she hired Fleming as custodian of the area, and he worked with landscape architect Ralph Cornell to come up with a plan that included a lodge, a parking lot, and then a system of trails that would divert pedestrian traffic from particularly sensitive areas. Torrey Pines Lodge was part of this infrastructure that supported scenic tourism. And Scripps made it clear. She said, I don't want you to mess with the natural beauty of this park. Right? She says, I don't want any so-called improvements or development. But she acknowledged there was a need for a restroom and for parking. And so she financed most of this project herself to ensure that there's this very substantial structure, harmonious with the environment, those are her words, to make sure it was built. And architect Richard Requa and his associate designed a structure in what we now call the Pueblo Revival style, which is sort of a fusion of Native American, Spanish colonial, and Anglo-American construction techniques. And it was made from handcrafted adobe bricks. Unfortunately, they were held together not by adobe mud mortar, but by cement. And so cement and adobe mud mortar expand and contract at different rates, which is going to just cause huge preservation problems. So anyway, but this one-story sort of Casa Ranchera becomes a very popular architectural style in the 1920s, characteristics both of Santa Fe, New Mexico, and Rancho Santa Fe, both communities built by railroad interests. So the Torrey Pines gateway to La Jolla and Del Mar led to a boom in scenic tourism along the coast. Hotels and restaurants prospered, small shops and businesses. The Casa de Mañana Hotel, built in 1924, capitalized on automobile tourism, as did the La Valencia Hotel and what's now the La Jolla Beach and Tennis Club. And you see all those cars. And Scripps was just astonished by the rapid change. She wrote, things go and grow so fast that we are being ushered into new worlds, as with the suddenness on a new birth. Driving home in the evening from Del Mar, a city of electric lights springs out before one's eyes from the mesa of sagebrush and greasewood. Spooky. Well done, time. So Ellen Scripps died in 1932, having lived long enough to see the success of her plans to create a community that was defined by what it chose to preserve and not just what it chose to build. La Jolla Park, now Ellen Browning Scripps Park, did not become the site of a hotel. Similarly, Torrey Pines coastal bluffs, viewed by many as prime real estate, were saved rather than subdivided. But neither site was saved in some kind of pristine, untouched state. Right? Scripps and her contemporaries actively shaped the landscape according to picturesque principles, creating composed views and very curated experiences of nature. So several waves of scenic tourism have hit the Southern California coast since the era of Ellen Scripps, with corresponding reactions by conservationists. For example, in the 1940s, the La Jolla Conservation Society prevented the construction of a breakwater and a yacht harbor around La Jolla Cove. In the 1950s and the 60s, the Torrey Pines Association, now the Conservancy, prevented the destruction of what's now the extension. And most recently, environmental activism made possible the San Diego La Jolla Underwater Park, which is now the Motlahul State Marine Reserve. So we are now living during another wave of tourism that threatens to engulf conservation efforts. And this time it's scenic tourism via Instagram and TikTok. So the La Jolla Park Historical District was recently placed on the National Register of Historic Places, and there's our plaque here, thanks really to the incredibly hardworking staff and volunteers of the La Jolla Historical Society. So let's have a big The area is still in need of maintenance and repair. The Torrey Pines State Reserve, meanwhile, faces dramatic budget cuts and staffing cuts that threaten decades of conservation gains. And so it's volunteer organizations like La Jolla Parks and Beaches, La Jolla Coastal Conservancy, Torrey Pines Association, and the Docent Society. It's an incredibly important time for these organizations. So Ellen Scripps showed us that preservation requires both vision and action. She didn't simply admire La Jolla's beauty, she invested her resources, her influence, and her energy to protect it. And today we really need the same combination of appreciation and engagement. The landscapes that define San Diego's character are only going to survive if we commit ourselves, whether through volunteering or advocacy or financial support. So we can't just admire what's been accomplished. We all need to be active participants in what still needs to be done. Thank you. Happy to answer questions if you have any.
What do you think she would say about the children's pool and sea lions and all that?
You know, that is a question I get very, very often, and I never answer it. But I think you can draw your own conclusions.
I've always admired Ellen Browning Scripps. I grew up here, went to Scripps Elementary School, which is now the children's school, and just loved how her attitude towards philanthropy, that it was to help the public. And she went far beyond La Jolla, of course, the zoo and all the other things she contributed to. I do feel that we should have a statue to her, and I know that was proposed at some point, and I don't know what the status of that is. I was wondering if you knew.
No, I don't know.
Possible
I don't know.
Yeah. But that is Scripps Park. Ellen Browning Scripps Park is her park, and she did buy the land, and it would be a perfect place to have pay tribute to her. So I hope that helps.
Isn't it a lovely idea? It really is. Yeah.
Do you think La Jolla ever got large enough in her lifetime that she thought, whoops, a little too successful? Maybe if she were then 30 years younger, she'd move on and start it again?
I don't think so. And, you know, she dies in 1932, and in the 20s and 30s, people are still pouring into La Jolla. Think about all the developments that are created in Maryland's La Jolla in the 20s, and this still seems like a gorgeous place to be.
But that was my point. You
Yeah.
mentioned that as people are pouring in. Do you think she ever said, I didn't mean to quite this many people?
I couldn't even guess. I couldn't even guess. But she was surprised, and she didn't like all the cars. You know, that was a big surprise to her.
Well, I can mention, and some people might not know here, that the entrance of the museum, we see the facade of her home, and then maybe mention the surrounding buildings that are part of her legacy.
Oh, of course. So we've all entered the building through these. At some point or another, we've noticed these beautiful arches by Irving Gill. Her first house, which was a kind of a Victorian house, burned down in 1915, and she hired Irving Gill, who was a pioneer in modernism, to build a brand new concrete house so that it wouldn't burn. And she wanted it to be left after her death to the community, and she left that open. So I think the fact that it's an art museum is a brilliant choice. But she also owned this entire block, all the way from the La Jolla Historical Society through the museum to the very end of the block. And she landscaped it in gardens with the help of Kate Sessions, and had several bungalows here, one of which has been moved up the coast a bit but guest bungalows. And the La Jolla Historical Society now occupies one of these original guest bungalows, the Wisteria Cottage.
I just want to mention there is a statue of Browning Scripps. It's at Scripps Hospital. If you go into the main entrance, there's a little area there from the garden, and there's a very nice statue of her. And of course, there's Scripps Hospital here in town. There was Scripps Hospital at Scripps College.
Unfortunately, you have to be sick to see that.
What became of Virginia?
She died in 1921 while she was on a round-the-world tour with a group of Bishop students. She had had some heart complaints for a number of years, and she was finally by a stroke. And it was very hard for Ellen because, you know, Virginia was a mighty force in La Jolla.
I venture to say that most of us here today are here in shared value of nature's beauty, of wanting to protect, enhance, and believing in nature's beauty. I'm wondering how all of the organizations and people that believe that really want to protect it, want our children and grandchildren to see and experience that same beauty rather than crowded streets and cars and electric bikes racing through, that how is there any organization that really is the hub of it's all these.
All these, yeah.
But how could we possibly all be working together in concert to promote what she believed in and what's really that brings us all together?
Mm-hmm. You know, I think that the project is just starting up. I mean, getting that coastline on the National Register of Historic Places was crucially important because it united a whole stretch of coast that was under federal protection. And so that just happened in 2024. So we're just moving forward with organizations aimed at figuring this out. And we're figuring out how different organizations to work together to improve this, you know, incredible heritage.
Back to the children's pool. I believe that the book says that in the 1920s, her brother suggested building that, but it doesn't mention Ellen's reaction at all, or if she wanted to be involved. And then and it took several years to get permitted and planned, and then in the early 1930s, she paid for it. But like the next paragraph says that her cognition was really declining, and she was getting very old and senile. So in her younger, clearly thinking days, did she mention a lot that she was concerned the children didn't have a place to swim?
She was very concerned about that location, actually, because kids swam there all the time, and there's a very dangerous rip tide right from there. And as the cove gets more and more crowded, more and more people are moving down the coast to swim there. It has a kind of there's a natural rock kind of arch that's underneath that a concrete pier. And she's very concerned that children, adults, teenagers are going to have problems. Yeah, and she writes about it, and she also writes with something that I find is quite interesting, that she wants to make sure that once that children's pool is built, that it's not just reserved for white children, but for the very large African American population that lives at the water. So she's well aware of what she's doing.
It's a little off topic, but do you think that the land covenant code has been helpful and she would have looked at it as helpful, or do you think it's undermining our sense of historic preservation in San Diego?
Gosh, that might be a little beyond me. Yeah, I don't know how she would respond to that.
About clubs and organizations. I know that she developed the Women's Club. Were there other associations or groups that she associated with? And then as it relates to, I know TPA, TPC, and I know the docents. But for me, I'd like to hear from some of the people in the room whom I've already heard are involved with La Jolla Coastal Conservancy. When did that start? And the La Jolla Parks and Beach, is that part? I'd like to understand a little bit more about those
That sounds like a
organizations and
wonderful
organizations.
outreach effort. Oh gosh, we've got a hand up back there. Hello. Introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Brenda, and I am part of the Jolla Coastal Conservancy. It's a build-up from the Coast Walk Trail. The Coast Walk was a test of how we can work with the city. This Coastal Conservancy is how we can scale this. We have a list of projects that we're working on in the city, and I will give credit to Bob Evans and Diane Kay, or I know Diane's here to speak. And Diane's and Shona. They all contributed to the list. It's not, and plus the San Diego Master Parks Plan. It's not anything that a group of people said, hey, we're just going to make this up because we can get more money. This is actually stuff that came through the planning groups, came from the city of San Diego. We have our marching orders and a priority list, and we're working on it as much as I'm screwed up at getting here today because we were in meetings with the city. I'd like to introduce Jeanette Williams. She's in the group. We've got a team working on this, and we're aligned with what Parks and Beaches is doing. They've done a great job getting William Point Sears almost to permit, and they've done a great job getting Picnic Grove 1 and 2. And so just, and Ann Dines, I don't think you guys can give enough credit for this woman, in what she's been doing with San Diego Parks Foundation, and then there's also the Conservancy. So look, there's some cool stuff happening. I wish I could give it all to you now, but I don't like to oversell it. It's definitely in our camp and is trying to do some stuff around permit challenges and leadership buckets and navigates that area. So yeah, we have plenty of alignment. It's just a matter of, most of us are all volunteers, and it's sucking up a ton of time. But you know, if you get it set up to run, the machine will be going. I'd like to introduce Tom Rushfeld. He's also on our board, who's our CFO. He needs money.
And I think Ellen Scripps would be
Can I just
thrilled.
say,
Yeah, go ahead.
I love the idea of Ellen Browning Scripps statue. So we should figure out how to get that done.
But Ms. Browning think the idea of La Jolla being a city is a good idea.
I think I'm gonna leave that one alone too. I'm gonna make friends here.
It feels like the next chapter, here we're all gathered today, we're all going to go home. We're going to go back to your hard work. There are people from Del Mar, there are people from other communities nearby who are volunteering doing tremendous amount of work. But it feels like the next chapter is a planning meeting for those people who would like to sit down and say, how can we help each other? So it becomes a regional spirit. It becomes conservancies working together, getting on the same page. And maybe that's already happening, but I think that's the next step for somebody to organize that meeting.
That stuff is organically happening right now and in ways that I'm even shocked. So again, please pay attention. And I think when we're ready to unveil all of these actual plans, like timelines, it might be helpful to bring folks in here and just say, if you want to know more, here we go. But we really do want to we got to get this. People should not sit there and go, the city did this, or the city did that. There is so many great people in there. They want to do stuff and they want to see things get done. And we're under a lot of regulation here just because we're next to an ocean. And that's its own navigation challenge. So what it took to just repair a bridge, we're going to try to break that cycle a little bit. And they're all going to learn. So
I think we have time for maybe one more question for Molly.
Well, I just think, I think Ellen Scripps would be so happy with the spirit, that you hear here, of people wanting to volunteer and wanting to participate and forming organizations and collaborating among organizations. And I'll just add that the La Jolla Historical Society is here to be kind of an anchor for these many different groups. So thank you so much for your attention. Thank you for the invitation.
Maybe the lab.